Today, it's all about letting go of attachments and pictures and outcomes. It's the mindset of a miracle, but the thing about Wayne Dyer is that he's writing this book for an 8th grade vocabulary, and yet he's introducing concepts that we often consider to be very abstract and Eastern, having abandoned the mystical roots of Western Christianity, not understanding that Jesus taught these things too and that they're part of our heritage and culture. But these paradoxical teachings of having a mind that is open to everything and attached to nothing. I have a mind that is open to everything and attached to nothing. Together. I have a mind that is open to everything and attached to nothing. Detached optimism, surrendered positivity, flexible faith. These are things that we find hard to hold in the same thought. And they bear a lot of discussion. They bear a lot of meditation. They bear a lot of reflection. And that's why on Tuesday night we have an opportunity to go deeper. We have small groups for about 25 minutes where we discuss questions. And I talk about all the things that I can't get into here in a very short period of time. And then we have a meditation to go even deeper. But as part of being attached to nothing, I want you to rip up and throw away the questions that I put in your bulletins today. Because I came up with them, and then I went online, and when Diane Vanzera, our youth minister, came up with questions for the Sunday school. Today the Youth of Unity is teaching the children with her questions, and I read them, and I went, oh my goodness, they're so much more succinct, they're so much more direct. There's a time to do, as Rumi said, sell your cleverness and purchase bewilderment. And let go of what you think you know and move into something new. I had a friend of mine who was a Unity minister and is no longer. And part of the reason, I think, is found in the fact that he actually, literally, told his congregation that they would outlaw the term I don't know. And no one could say the words I don't know in their church. Because he said there's a part of you that does know, and you can never know unless you affirm it. And you know what? He has a point. But in order to get to that point of knowing, you have to go through, I don't know. The one who thinks they know cannot know, and the one who knows that they don't know can know, it says in the Tao Te Ching. And it's that bewilderment, that openness, a paradoxical openness that is embracing everything that we're talking about here today. And Diane Vanzera came up with these questions, and I had to let go of mine. And they're based on the ones that I wrote, but they're so much clearer. And let me read them to you and let you know that you will find these right outside the fellowship hall on the table, along with that meditation technique and all manner of other things. What does it mean to have a mind that is open to everything and attached to nothing? In what ways has your environment and your culture, the one in which you grew up, affected how you see the world? What have you experienced when you tried to step out of the expectations that other people have for you? Use your imagination. What space do you want to occupy in this world? What would it look like, and what would you do there? How would you feel when you were in that space of possibility? How willing are you to change your mind when you believe that your way is the one true, right, and only way? What can happen if you close your mind to other possibilities? On page 10, the author talks about having a mind that is open to everything. What does that mean to you? Explain this statement. What you think about expands. When we commit to being open to everything, what are some ways we can overcome the fear chatter that might go on in our heads as a result? How do you let go of your attachments? Some deep stuff. You see, as they found at Harvard University, people who had miracles or spontaneous remissions of terminal illnesses had to have an opening where they rethought or redirected their whole belief system before they could have the answer to their prayer or their visualization or whatever they hold in faith. Have a mind that is open to everything and yet attached to nothing. I have a mind that is open to everything and attached to nothing. Together. I have a mind that is open to everything and attached to nothing. This is very practical. It sounds so abstract, and yet it's so useful Admiral James Stockdale, who was a prisoner of war in Vietnam in solitary confinement for 8 years, experienced this, and it's called the Stockdale paradox. He didn't name it, but it was named by Jim Collins, the business writer, and it's basically having an optimistic attitude that is also realistic. What's called facing the brutal facts with optimism. And he found that there were 3 kinds of people in the prisoner of war camp, the Hanoi Hilton. And 2 of these 3 groups did not survive. The first, the ones who died the fastest, were the optimists. The magical thinking optimists who said, we'll be free by Thanksgiving. We'll be free by Christmas. We'll be free by New Year's. We'll be free by Groundhog Day. We'll be free by Easter. And these times would come, they'd be disappointed more and more, and they'd finally give up. The people who lasted a little longer were the pessimists. They were the ones who said, well, it's hopeless anyway. Why should I even hope for anything? And they just gave up, and they eventually didn't make it. The people who made it were the people who had a detached expectancy, a detached optimism, that faced the facts of their situation, but knew in the end it was all going to work out for them. Admiral Stockdale wrote, I never once doubted, not only that I'd get out, but that I'd prevail in the end and turn this experience into the defining event of my life, which in retrospect, I would not trade for anything. Now think about your life. If you're attached to every appearance as you're working through a situation, judging every single moment by the appearances of things, you'll be like that first group. If you just give up and sit in the middle of the road and wait for a truck to run over you, you're going to end up like the second group. But there is a middle way, and it is that detached optimism. It is that directed faith that faces things as they are, and yet uses them as the raw materials out of which you're creating that which will be, with a positive expectancy that's based in realism. Now, I've often shared about Uncle Johnny, my dad's great Uncle Johnny. I never met him, of course. Lived around the turn of the century and probably up to about 1940. But his main job in life, his main career was he was a bootlegger. But the rest of the time, he would, my family comes from the gold country in California, he would mine for gold. And they had a creek that went through the property of the ranch. And he would shovel ore into a sluice box. My mom still got the sluice box in her basement. And the water would come through it, and it would move through it, and all of the things that had no substance, all of the ore, the gravel, would wash through. And what would it leave in the bottom when all was said and done? The gold. Your life is not about the ore, it's about the refined gold that is yours when you move through the situations of life. And know, as Admiral Stockdale said, these can be defining moments in your life. They can give you those lessons, but only if you have an attitude of detached optimism, an attitude, a mind that is open to everything but attached to nothing, a mind that is playfully optimistic and flexible in how it receives things. You know, one time I was going through a situation where, this was many years ago, 20-something years ago, where we had somebody in the Sunday school department, and I feel comfortable telling it now because nobody's going to know anything about this person, in a church I served many, many years ago, and I got more complaints about that first grade Sunday school teacher than everybody else put together in my whole 34 years of ministry. He was giving tests to the children and grading them and telling them they were doing it wrong and doing all kinds of things, but when he ended up telling the director of the Sunday school and me exact opposite things, saying that the other one had approved him having access to the kids without the co-teacher there, and various other things like that, we asked him to step down, whereupon he went and told a bunch of people a bunch of things that weren't true. I felt so self-righteous, so wounded, and I had a friend of mine say to me, you know, Greg, there's a wounded inner child in you that needs a chance to speak. You need to ask that little Greg inside of you what he needs. And I said, what do you need, little Greg? And that little part of me said, revenge. And so I said, if you knew that revenge would make things worse, would you want it then? No. If you knew that by letting go of revenge that things would work out better, would you be willing to let it go? Yes. And I felt it lift. And the words came to me, revenge may seem sweet, but success is sweeter, and you can't have both. So and then the words came, you ready for this? This is how God is loving you. This is how God is loving me. Together? This is how God is loving me. How does God love you? By having a person in your life who's doing things you don't like them to do. Because what it did was gave me an opportunity to go deeper, to detach from outcomes, to detach from the public opinion of other people, and to move into a consciousness of detached optimism, and it all worked out, and it all worked out beautifully. And I found out later he had the same thing happen in another church nearby. And so it was validated. But, you know, these situations come up in our lives. They seem so unjust, but they're there for whatever reason, but definitely there as the raw materials out of which we can create that new step in consciousness. But we've got to detach from a lot of things. One of the things we've got to detach from is our picture of how it's supposed to look as we go through it. And another is how other people may respond, or what other people may say, think, or do. Think about your family situation. Think, you know, one of the questions Diane wrote was, what is your family of origin? How are people expecting? What have you experienced when you try to step out of the expectations that other people have for you? Are you willing to step out of those expectations and not let them run you? In Galatians, Paul wrote, am I going to seek human approval or divine approval? If I were still a people pleaser, I couldn't serve Christ. There's a time in your life where you've got to let go of people pleasing and do what is best for you. And this situation may be teaching you just that. Moving out of those expectations. What other things do you need to detach from? One of them may be your cultural definitions of what you should be or what should be. Where in your life has your religion, your religious training, your family of origin issues, your class, race, religion, group, ethnicity, geography, how have these things defined you? Now, I've lived all over the country, and I come from a part of the country. One thing I've noticed is every part of the country has its identity, its cultural identity that is both a positive and can also be a negative, can be a hindrance if people get stuck in it, or maybe provide something that's very nurturing and good. I came from a part of the country that Mark Twain talked about. He said that the entire map of the United States was tilted on its side, shaken 4 or 5 times, and everything loose fell to California. And so there's a certain culture there, and I served 2 churches in California, one in northern and one in southern, and it's pretty wacky. There's a lot of good there. There's a lot of openness and everything. But there's so you have to step outside of the cultural norm. How am I being defined by my family of origin, my group, my ethnicity, my class, whatever the thing is, the education of my family? I was reading about Martha Creek. That Martha Creek, not only, you remember her, she's the Unity minister who has served in this church as a consultant. And she said, not only was she the first person in her culture, in her family, anywhere in her family, that got a PhD or a master's or graduated from college, but she was the first one that ever graduated from high school.
Oh, wow.
And nobody in her family attended any of those graduations. She said, nor did I need them to. So you have to step outside of the expectations, but you have to be self-differentiated. That means knowing where you define yourself. Now here in this area, what we notice coming in from the outside, is that so much of the culture here is rooted in the church of origin. This is very much about the old school church. Now I grew up in an area that's just as heavily Catholic as this area is, and I'm not criticizing the Catholic Church. I'm talking about cultural issues here. Where I came from, though, I guess it's in the water, there was Vatican II and Thomas Merton and the mysticism and all those real things, and that really was kind of bubbling up. So I grew up with a very progressive environment around the Catholic Church. They didn't get the memo in some of these parishes around here, and some of the priests may have. You might have had some pretty tough times growing up, even though John the 23rd and Thomas Merton, and there's so much rich mysticism, there's so many great things. But it may not have been, it was about obedience and dogma, which of course was pre-Vatican II and maybe post-Vatican II, and then coming back now, we're coming back into a new era where things are opening up. But where do you need to decide for yourself that you're not going to live not only out of what they taught you, that was a misinterpretation perhaps, but also that you're not going to rebel against it. That you're not going to close your mind to all possibilities just because you were given some kind of dogmatic teaching and have some difficulties around it. So where do you need to let go of the limitations of that? Where in your family were you told nobody in our family ever, nobody is like that. Nobody thinks that way. I've heard this so much since I've been here. That's just weird. That's just weird. We've never done it that way before. It's just weird. And that, again, is a cultural thing that is very regional. So how do you get out of that attitude? Get a mind that is open to everything but attached to nothing. Open to everything but attached to nothing. Get into a space of, I don't know. Now, I like to give practical things to work on. When I ask Lynn about my talk on Sundays, every so often she'll say, that was a really good talk, but you didn't give them anything to work with. And I realize that people need practical tools. And they don't always need a new practical tool every week because, if you just work with one or two and you do it on a consistent basis, you'll get a lot out of it. So remember the question and answer process. We've got a handout right outside of Fellowship Hall where you ask a question and you go into a space of, I don't know. And then you see what comes up. You have to go through the space of I don't know in order to release all of your preconceptions, all of your expectations, and perhaps you've held on to people, places, and things. And how do you detach from the things that you're holding on to now? Maybe somebody you need to forgive. Maybe you've left a job. Don't go trying to look for a new job till you've taken the old job up the 7 steps. That 7 steps method is outside of fellowship. And you can do some journaling. You get a breakup. Or maybe the breakup was 20 years ago and you never got over it, so you keep dealing with the same thing over and over again. Take the relationship up the 7 steps. I've often shared about the time Lynn and I, the first time we really worked on this together. We had bought a new house, and we had 48 hours to sell our condo, or we were going to take a 6-figure hit. And suddenly Lynn said, we've never taken the condo up to 7 steps. So we sat there and did it. 36 hours later, we had one call, one person looked at it, and one person bought it. That's all you need. So what do you need to do to let go of? Let go of your preconceptions about yourself. Take yourself up the 7 steps. What self am I talking about? The know-it-all that thinks they have all the answers. The part that is so timid and so scared of everything. The part that wants to dominate and control. The part that is a victim. Whatever it is that is a limiting view of yourself, take that up the 7 steps and do the journaling work and let it go. And I've shared about what happened to me when Lynn received her licensed teacher. And she got an epiphany at Unity Village that it was time to tell me, because I was so sure of myself and knew that I had all the answers. And she had been studying with Jane Elizabeth Hart. She'd opened up to things, and I was very, very closed. And so she came back, and she got that it was time to talk to me about it and to share that with me. And she knew how I would respond, which was exactly how I responded. It was her problem, and I had it all together. As I like to say, there from sleeping on the couch by my own choice, before I went to sleep, I said, God, if there's anything to this, I'm open. And I really meant it, even though I knew there wasn't anything to it. No? The next morning I woke up and everything looked different. I realized that there was truth in what she was saying, and I had to be open. And I ended up studying with that great teacher, Jane Elizabeth Hart, who was an executive at Unity School and a licensed Unity teacher, and began to open up to new ideas. Began to not be in that cleverness. Remember what Rumi said, sell your cleverness and purchase that sense of ambiguity, that sense of uncertainty, that sense of bewilderment. Now, bewilderment is a scary thing. We think, we can't do that. It's because of our culture. My mentor, Mary Allen, used to say, just imagine the next time you watch a presidential debate, if one of the two candidates says, they ask him a question and say, I'm not sure about that. Let me get back to you on that. I don't really have the answer to that. They'd be dead in the water. Our culture does not value, I don't know. It doesn't value bewilderment. And it's a real failing because we end up assuming things so strongly, and that's why the polarization in our world politically, and that's why people aren't talking to each other, because we already got our minds made up, and we only talk to the people who think the way we do, and we only look at the things that reinforce that, and I'm as guilty as everybody else, but of course, I'm right. So we have to be willing to let go for just a moment of what we think is true in order to see possibly, just possibly, there's a higher truth. Another thing we can do is do that for each other. You know, so often we think we know what the other person needs, but even if we do, if we're doing it from a standpoint of wanting to control them, to get them to change to please us, to make us more comfortable, what we'll find is that we're not helping them at all. A friend of mine once wrote this in his church newsletter. He said, some people use what they call mistakenly positive thinking on each other. Words no longer being effective, nonverbal persuasion not working, they begin a kind of under-the-breath chant like, you will quit smoking, you will quit smoking. It's sophisticated voodoo without pins and dolls, but it's not positive thinking or prayer. Positive prayer is constructive, expected thinking that doesn't force any specific outcome or course of action and looks for and expects the good for others. There's one way to reach others, and that is through beholding the Christ or holding them in the light, not for their own good, because if it's for their own good, we're on a power trip. Usually, if we're honest, it's not just for their own good, but it's for our own convenience or what we think is peace of mind. Sometimes we want the glory and the credit. Look how I straightened this person out. All he had to do is listen to me. I know what's best. The way we want to go is the way of the kingdom within. No force, no control. Letting go. Allowing other people to be who and what they are without any insistence that they satisfy us. That's Wayne Dyer's own definition, not in this book but elsewhere, of love. Allowing people to be who and what they choose to be without any insistence that they satisfy us. That's a very challenging understanding, but it fits the understanding that Jesus had. You know, when Jesus said, love your neighbor, love one another, the word he used for love in Greek was agape. Philia was the word for friendship and liking. You know, you're my buddy, you're my pal, you're my friend. I philia you, which is I love you in a way that's conditional because it's based in a relationship that's mutual. But he told us to do agape, which is a Greek word that meant impersonal divine love that expects nothing in return. Detached love, a mind that is open to everything but attached to nothing in the realm of love. So for some reason this morning, this is the important thing I'm supposed to talk about because I didn't talk about it at 9 o'clock at all. So here, what we're talking about is how to allow other people to be who and what they choose to be without any insistence that they satisfy us, and let them be. And let them be. Not to be a victim, not to, be a doormat. Certainly we have to have boundaries, self-differentiation. We've got to be able to stand up for ourselves, but not to control other people or to manage outcomes according to our own likes and dislikes. Even letting go of our personal preferences and being open to a new possibility. As I look back over my life, and I do this periodically, I realize that the times that I got into the biggest trouble were without exception the times that I was the most attached to specifics. Specific outcomes, specific circumstances, not understanding that the best way to get from point A to point B was to go clear over here. And I wasn't flexible enough, so I fought it all the way. Not understanding that that sense of detachment would actually serve me if I would just be willing to loose and let go and fully and freely release, that the outcomes would be much better. It's very interesting. Those people who have the best answers, the miracles in life, are those people who are willing to let go of their judgment by appearances moment by moment and also the outcomes in situations, knowing that the highest good is working out. So this is the mindset of a miracle. And we're supposed to move into a time of prayer right now. So I'm just going to ask you to breathe in slowly and let it out slowly and be open. Be open in this moment to a new possibility. That you are not defined by your family, by your region, your geography, by your group, by anything. Silently affirm, I have a mind that is open to everything, yet attached to nothing. And to all those limiting attitudes, the opinions of others, or even your own views of outcomes, simply say, I loose and I let you go, and fully and freely release all outcomes. I let go of all that has happened, seeing it whole and complete. I free everyone and everything to their highest good and their guidance, as I am set free. Just do this in silently for a moment. Feel the lifting, lifting, lifting of all burdens. You are creating a space through detachment for more of God. God cannot fill a cup that's already full, so empty your cup of all attachments and personal expectations. And with a mind that is open to everything and attached to nothing, be open to receive. Thank you, God. And so it is. Now take a deep breath, let it out, and let go of any papers in your hands or any distractions, anything that may rustle or move. And just let go into these thoughts that are so simple, yet so effective in moving us into a time of meditation. Sit comfortably, easily, and feel the weight of the air all around you, touching your skin. Just become aware of it. Feel the surface of your own skin. Be aware of this seeming boundary. And now imagine that a magical eraser is now erasing the outline of your being. When your mind wanders, bring yourself back to the outline and imagine it being erased until there is no boundary between you and the rest of the universe. Just try this out for a moment in peace. Feel the spaciousness of being open. A mind that is open to everything and yet attached to nothing. A space of all possibility. Positive detachment. Flexible optimism. Surrendered hope. Open at the top, leading with the heart. And so it is. We take our offering in our hand, and we give with a sense of detachment, and we receive abundantly. I give with a sense of detachment, and I receive abundantly. Together.
I give with a sense of detachment, and I receive abundantly.
And silently. And again, aloud together.
I give with a sense of detachment,